Hello again. For today's discussion, we have cellist Michael Katz, who's just given us an exciting performance of selections from 7 tunes heard in China by Bright Shang. And we have a very, very special pianist, Ling-Ju Lai, who is next up with her arrangement of Bach keyboard concerti. So thank you, Michael Ling-Ju, for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So, Michael, that was so cool. I mean, that you hear sounds that you don't expect to hear out of cello, and something about folk music. No matter where it comes from, I don't recognize any of the tunes personally, but just something just is so relatable, and you just start dancing to it. And so tell us a little bit about your journey with this piece and how you were introduced to this piece.
Well, I first heard this piece a very long time. I listened to, it was written for Yo-Yo Ma, and I heard his recording, and I remember thinking back then, obviously that's his heritage, it's probably such a personal and special piece for him, and it's a cool piece, it'll be cool to play, but I don't know if I can bring out the style. When I moved to New York, I started playing with a group called Music from China, which includes traditional Chinese instruments, and they play mostly arrangements of traditional Chinese tunes, as well as contemporary Chinese compositions, which are written for these traditional instruments. And for some reasons, these composers keep coming back to incorporating the cello. And normally you probably would think, well, the cello, it's such a Western instrument, how does it fit? But I think the range and the timbre end up working extremely well with some of these instruments. So I get to play on a regular basis with instruments like the erhu and the pipa and the dizi, which is a Chinese flute, Chinese percussion. So over the years, I've been playing with them almost every year for the past 10 years, and I've gotten to know these instruments very well, and how to imitate and respond to the sounds and the styles. So when I decided it's time to play this piece for the first time, it was much easier because it was suddenly a familiar language, and each of the 7 tunes, I played 5, but each of the 7 come from a different region in China and also a different time. So some of these tunes were written about 100 years ago. There is one that was written thousands of years ago. And they all have words that you've seen on the screen. And I think many of them have a very special combination of memory and nostalgia with kind of a bittersweet sense of joy and also loss, and these are really all very special and complex tunes.
Wow, is it as fun to play as it is to listen? Because it's just so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that he does so well, it's not that much that he asks the cello to imitate other instruments as much as he brings together the best of the cello and the best of these instruments, because the piece is very idiomatic. It's written very well for the cello. There's nothing that doesn't ring well. It fits very, very naturally, but it also at the same time sounds like other instruments.
Wow. Thank you so much for the performance. And one of the reasons why our programming committee has compiled this pieces, Ling-Ju's piece and Michael's piece, is to sort of create a sense of community, sense of being among many, when we're alone within ourselves in times like this. So I just wanted to ask you guys, what have you been doing to stay optimistic and grow as an artist in times like this? Ling, do you want to go first?
Oh, I feel that this is a very crucial and very urgent time. So I believe that artists have a responsibility to study and observe human behaviors and human expressions. So of course, for me, I reflect my thoughts through music. But I take this time to inform myself on how the global health crisis is interconnected with many issues, climate change and refugee migration, and the necessity of a very strong healthcare system. So I like to educate myself more, and I hope to become a better global citizen and support the causes that I believe in. So I take this time to study.
Oh, what about you, Michael? What have you been doing?
Well, for me, I was actually in the middle of a tour when I got a notice, your next concert is canceled, go back home. And then after that, everything just stopped all of a sudden. And and at first, I thought it was going to be very difficult to stay motivated and upbeat. But these online concerts we're doing, it's such a great opportunity, both for me to stay motivated as I'm learning and relearning solo rap. So music that's new for me that I've never had the time to learn, or things that I've played many, many years ago and thought, oh, it'll be great to bring it back sometime. But also thinking how lucky we are that we have now the kind of technology and opportunity that we didn't have 50 years ago, even 20 years ago, where doing something this probably wouldn't have been possible. And obviously for musicians, I mean, we have a need to perform, but also all of you at home that have just as much of a need to continue hearing music, whether it's live or not. So I think it's really wonderful to have this chance to do something like this.
Yeah, this connects us all and builds community amongst us. So we are so appreciative and thankful for you guys sharing music with us. So, the title Out of Many One is such an understatement of what Ling-Ju you're going to be doing for us next. You are presenting, movements from Bach's keyboard concerti, which often is played by keyboard instrument and a whole orchestra, and you decided to do this on a solo piano. And I know you play a lot of music by Bach, and he has written quite a bit of pieces for solo piano. But what was your motivation for choosing these pieces, and how do you make it work?
Well, honestly, my reason to play them is just I love these repertoire very much. And as a young child, I used to play the violin. So these three specific concerti were originally written for a solo violin and a string orchestra. And so I grew up loving these musical works. And so there's no reason not to play them. And besides, for Bach, this type of transcription was not unusual. He actually took other composers' concerti, for instance, Antonio Vivaldi, Marcello, and even Telemann, and he transcribed their concerti into works for solo keyboard. So these were basically compositional technique and exercise for young Bach. So it's very simple. I just like them very much.
And he also often transcribed his own music and adapted it to different types of ensemble and type of pieces.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and you played these pieces with orchestra. So what do you have to do now that you don't have orchestra? Do you have to do something, obviously more work?
Sometimes I would change the dynamic a little bit more, because without the contrast of the string colors, then the piano will have to imagine more. So sometimes I take the liberties to do different dynamics, and sometimes I add slight inner voices.
Oh, that's so great. And one other intriguing thing about it is that these three movements are not from the same concerto. And what kind of narrative were you having in your mind when you compiled these three different movements from different concerti?
I usually prefer for the music to speak for itself, but very briefly, I would just say that I think the first Allegro in D minor presents a great challenge and emotional turbulence for the listeners. And the Andante movement offers a moment of self-reflection. And the ending movement, it's in D major. I just would like to be reminded that I need to stay physically and emotionally alert, because D major is very uplifting.
I think we are in for a treat, and thank you, Michael, Ling-Ju, so much for joining us today. And here is Ling-Ju with her arrangement of Bach Keyboard Concerto.